before amazing educationist. She's a parent as well, taught science, maths, and technology at all levels of education. She's a principal of GIS. She's also an author.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. And she's also a fellow of Columbia University. I also have Tara O'Connell, UNICEF, Chief of Education in Ghana, and Dr. Joshua Mallet. We'll be discussing technology enabled education in a pandemic. And this is coming right after this break. And of course, it's brought to you by the MasterCard Foundation.
The City Breakfast Show. Rise above the noise.
Massa, make what make you go. We need to go to the bank first before we go and pay for the things. Time no day like that too.
Relax. Everything they my hand inside.
Massa, we need to get the cash.
Forget the cash. See, transfer, pack payment. Pack. I did use the Cow Bank app. No stress.
That's slow for me. I still forgo my bank. I know.
So it's 8 minutes past 9, and I'm just going to jump into the eDTech Monday, but it's brought to us by the Mastercard Foundation. And the Mastercard Foundation works with visionary organizations to enable young people in Africa and in indigenous communities in Canada to access dignified and fulfilling work. It's one of the largest private foundations in the world with a mission to advance learning and promote financial inclusion and to create an inclusive and equitable world. Now, the foundation was created by MasterCard in 2006 as an independent organization with its own board of directors and management. Now, in Ghana, after more than a decade working with the private sector and government to promote financial inclusion and education through its Scholars Program, the MasterCard Foundation launched the Young Africa Works, which is a 10-year strategy to enable 3 million young Ghanaians, particularly young women, to access dignified and fulfilling work by 2030. And the program aims to enable the growth of women-owned enterprises through business development, services, access to finance, and access to markets, enable young people to acquire the skills that are needed by businesses in growing sectors of the economy, and strengthen the quality of education to prepare students for the world of work. And of course, they are also aiming at scaling digital training and strengthening technology-focused employment opportunities. And of course, the eDTech Monday is one of the initiatives of the Foundation's Regional Center for Teaching and Learning in ICT. And they're basically aimed at leveraging technology to advance teaching and learning. Cookie, that's a big one.
It is a big
It's a
one.
long one. But so here we are. And this morning, we're talking about COVID-19 and how long it's been with us and how it's disrupted the way we work and live, and education in particular of young people at different levels of the educational ladder. Now, schools closed for a long time, and we had to use technology to ensure that teaching and learning continued to get our students not to be left behind. And of course, we are going to ask this morning what key lessons we've learned so far after almost a year's worth of digital learning. What lessons have we learned? And how has online and blended learning, they call it. So some are doing online, some are doing mainline, for want of a better word. How has that mixture worked? And what other interventions have been introduced? How are they doing? And how do we scale up and embed these approaches into educational system? So this is eDTech Monday, initiative for the Mastercard Foundation Center for Teaching and Learning in ICT. Today we're examining technology-enabled education. Now, I have some very interesting people to talk to. Dr. Mary Ashun, as I said earlier, an educationist and a parent. She's taught science, math, and technology at all levels of education. She's the principal of the Ghana International School, GIS. She's an author, and she's also a Klingenstein Fellow of Teachers College, Columbia University, New York. Dr. Ashun, great to have you. Good morning.
Good morning, Bernard. Thank you so much for having me.
Always good to talk to you. Great. I have Tara O'Connell. She's UNICEF's Chief of Education in Ghana. She spent several years working in the educational sectors across Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, and the Caribbean. And in Ghana, she's managing the Mastercard Foundation's UNICEF Recovery and Resilience Program that supports GES's education sector response to COVID.
Good
Tara,
morning,
great to
Bernard.
have you.
Good morning, listeners.
Brilliant. And I also have, last but not least, Dr. Joshua Mallet, Director at the Center for National Distance Learning and Open Schooling, also known as CENDLOS in Accra. And he's been involved in open and distance learning and ICT in education since 1994. And his present role, among others, at CENDLOS is to conceptualize, design, and implement e-learning for pre-tertiary education. Dr. Mallet, good morning. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good morning, Bernard, and good morning, colleagues.
Brilliant. Let me start with Dr. Ashun. You are an educationist and a parent, and you're in the middle of navigating the continuity of learning in the pandemic. And how did these fare?
Thank you so much, Bernard. I'll start with home because that was the easiest one. I've got 3 university-age sons, and they're in their room, they're on their devices, they're doing their courses. I just had to make sure there was food, water, and internet, and that was it. So that was pretty easy. Every so often they get bored, they come downstairs, they talk about, how long is this going to go on, but for the most part, they're coping. Forgive me, I've got airplanes flying
I know.
overhead.
I know. And
Um,
yeah. So for you, in terms of the home, it was pretty straightforward. What about the
for
school?
me, yes, for school, it was a whole lot complicated, as you can imagine. In school, and all these children, of course, have parents that are not me, and so that was a bit difficult. So what we started doing was just first looking at the constituencies that we serve, looking at staff, right, and asking ourselves, in this new climate, what could we do to make sure that staff are able to cope? So supporting them well through professional development, just extra attention with call-ins, how you doing, reaching out, sometimes walking out to their offices. So myself, the vice principals, other managers, just making that extra effort. Small group tech support as opposed to large group meetings. We scaled down, if I should say, often we talk about scaling up. But in this instance, scaling down and putting them in smaller groups, meeting them in smaller groups so that it would be a bit more comforting, a bit more staff-centric to make them feel that we were focusing on them. And then some flex work so that staff can take care of those at home. Because for us, while our students are at home or have been at home, our staff, I have required that they come to work. And part of the reason for this is both the mental energy that we get from following routines and doing what we used to do. So there was that mental aspect, as well as just connectivity. We all live in different parts of Accra, and one person's internet might be stable, the other person's not as much. But at school, we have stable internet. But then with that comes the difficulty of trying to, or for a staff member trying to balance their home life with school life. And many of them have children at home. Many of them have children who are not going to school. And yet they are here teaching other people's children. And some of them too had children, have children here at GIS. So providing some flex work for them, understanding that every so often, teacher A might have to take a day here, 2 days there, or maybe an entire week to work from home. And we've taken those on a case-by-case basis. When it comes to parents, we had a check-in call team. And so this was done early on in the pandemic, around the third term of last year, and we have to pick it up again. But what we did was just pick up a phone and call a home and just say, hey, how are you doing? Allow someone to vent. And we did get a lot of that, lots of venting. Why aren't you open? All sorts of stuff that we could do nothing about. I didn't invent COVID. I can't do anything about COVID except, protect myself and those close to me. But the venting is sometimes a good thing. And so we did that. We had a reach out team that was comprised of the counselors and other teachers that we knew had really good rapport with parents. And just a nightmare it was. But what we realized also was that parents were saying, I don't know how you do this. And I said, hallelujah, I am glad you don't know how we do this, because you have 4 of your own kids, and a typical teacher will have at least 20 kids in the class who are not their children. And having to manage that, is difficult. For students, we consider their unique developmental stages. What might be good for a 6-year-old is not necessarily good for a 15-year-old, and vice versa. So looking at this, changing the schedule, the easiest thing for us to do at that time was just to take the daily schedule that we already had and just move it right into the online world, which will likely not be the best idea. And we realized that very, very quickly, went back onto the drawing board and tried to figure out a schedule that worked, a schedule that, while we wanted the kids to be on screen, they had to be on screen, was to try to give more breaks as well. Again, we looked at the developmental stages to do that. More monitoring, more supervision. And then even when it came down to the nitty-gritty tech tools that we were using, and not to get swayed by the latest thing that somebody was talking about, you'll find that from around March, every month or even week, there was talk of a new video conferencing tool, and it does this and it does that. And, and consistency is best when you are in a pandemic state like this. And so for us, we were already on the Google platform, and we chose to go with Google Meet. So we were continuously sharing feedback with the Google team, and thousands of schools worldwide were doing the same. And so updates have really helped, but that consistency was really, really important. Focus on Google Meet as our video conferencing tool, add Google Classroom onto that, which we were already using, and then other little tools that all feed into Google Meet, so that there's some consistency for staff, consistency for children, not too many things changing, because the pandemic had come and changed a whole lot of things.
Brilliant. Just briefly on the things you've said. Look, I hear you. It's great you navigated this, but having 3 university-age sons and GIS are not your typical Ghanaian population sample.
Yes.
So my question to you is, how applicable and scalable are some of the things? I mean, you said you give them food data, and what are 1 or 2 of the things you did both at home and at school that you really think can be scalable on a national level?
I think that, on a national level, one of the things I've discovered talking to, and I've worked with school leaders, talk to them from other school jurisdictions and not just private schools. And one of the things that I think needs to be scalable or could be scalable is just making parents aware of what is needed. We've had a lot of, we call them coffee mornings or small group meetings with parents. We've had not staff meetings. We do have staff meetings, but parent meetings. And I'm finding that something like that, if we can adopt it nationwide, where we make it intentional. We can't assume that parents everywhere know that a child needs a quiet learning area. We can't assume that a parent realizes that because of the intense screen time, or because if they're not even online, because of the fact that they just don't know what's going on, a lot more attention needs to be paid to children. What I have heard and some experiences of school heads in certain jurisdictions, what they're telling me, a lot of the parents just thought, oh, you're sitting at home. Okay, come to the market, come help me. Let's go fish. Let's go do everything but study, right? And the ability to be able to recognize that, yes, the child needs to be doing, but the things that they can be doing can be a combination of studying as well as helping around the house or helping mom and dad with whatever they need to do to survive. So that would be one thing that immediately comes to mind as something that is scalable. Parental awareness, and how our schools do that, how our media outlets like yourself, you could do that, have sessions there where we're reminding parents that, this is a difficult time for children. And so explaining to them.
Thank you. Let me turn my attention to Tara O'Connell, forgive me. So Tara, you are with UNICEF, and you are the UNICEF chief in Ghana, or chief of education for UNICEF. And for listeners, UNICEF is the United Nations International Children, initially called the Emergency Fund, but it's no longer an emergency fund, from 1946. So what I want to find out from you, Tara, again, thank you for joining us. So what are some of the big lessons from 2020 about access to education and building inclusive educational systems that we've learned? Okay, and also talk to me about some of the national programs which were introduced to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on the education of young people in Ghana, and whether these interventions are worked or not. So let's start with those. Thank you, Tara.
Great. Thank you, Bernard, and good morning to everyone. I'll start with the question around, how did the government respond in terms of the education sector when faced with the pandemic, and what programs have been implemented, and then maybe talk a little bit about the lessons that we have learned. I think it's clear to everyone, and Dr. Ashun has already said, that, March of 2020 left the very unprecedented situation where children in pre-tertiary level education, as well as beyond, but I'll focus on pre-tertiary, were left at home for the first time, where we saw this model of traditional schooling in person and in a physical classroom was no longer able to function and was no longer meeting the learning needs of children. Now, we know after that there were some limited numbers of children that did return to school at JHS and SHS level, junior high school and senior high school level, to prepare for examinations. But in 2020, over 8 million children for the most part of the year remained out of physical school. And so the challenge is very clear around how does the Ministry of Education and Ghana Education Service, as well as UNICEF and other partners and stakeholders in the sector, how do we work to support the continuous learning during this time period for children? So a number of the initiatives that were put in place, I'll highlight a few. Ghana Education Service very quickly responded to the pandemic by scaling the iCampus. And the iCampus was a learning platform geared for senior high school as well as technical and vocational level students. But of course, it has an internet component to it. The Ghana Learning Television then was also launched, and that was a wider scope of target from KG onwards, trying to show through animation some of the lessons and get the curriculum across via television. And then Ghana Learning Radio, supported by UNICEF, MasterCard Foundation, and other partners, including USAID. Ghana Learning Radio was an effort to try to reach those children and learners that we know were not able to access through internet and television, the continuous learning channels. And Ghana Learning Radio has now been launched with the KG all the way through JHS 3 or Junior High School 3 level curriculum lessons. So we look at these responses as being a massive achievement in the face of really very, very disruptive time period for the education sector. This has led us to a number of lessons learned, as you quite rightly point out that we may have. We have seen some of these programs fare better than others. Dr. Ashun had mentioned that with her sons, she had to provide food and water and internet connectivity. But for those households that struggle to have food and water on the table, where parents are continually needing to leave the household to work to bring in the livelihood and the meals at night, for those households without internet connectivity, this question then becomes a massive challenge. How do we ensure that we don't leave behind what's estimated to be 40% of the population? We know that through some of the data gathered by Ghana Education Service, that in wealthier households, in the richest households in our country, about 53% of households say they have some form of remote for their children to learn. But when we look at the country's poorer households, the poorer quintile, only about 3% say that they have some form of this remote learning support for their children. And that emphasizes this divide. And so when we look at lessons learned, I would highlight that divide as one of the largest. We know that existed, that divide, before COVID. But COVID has enhanced that divide as we look at technology and digital solutions in the education sector. And I think that lesson will remain with us. I think that's something that we still struggle with and we will continue to try to address. Certainly from the UNICEF perspective, that will be one of the key challenges going forward that we work to support GES in addressing. But I would also highlight a lesson that was very clear during this time period, and that is the need as we introduce digital solutions in the education sector, as we look at remote learning online or via radio or other mechanisms that are not the in-person classroom. What is the role of the parent and what is the role of the teacher? And this becomes a new dynamic for us, where a teacher does not have children sitting in front of them, but instead they are communicating through a virtual type of connection. So how do assessments take place? How do teachers ensure that they can assess the learning both at a formative level, meaning, day to day, week to week, as well as at the end of chapters, at the end of terms, to ensure that there's some sort of formative assessment assessment that takes place. And the role of the parents. And Dr. Ashun also highlighted this. One of the areas that UNICEF quite strongly responded to in the pandemic was to try to work with parents and caregivers, particularly at the young years, to help them understand how home-based learning can take place and how a parent can engage, even whilst going about their daily routine, to support their children in learning during this time period.
So, fantastic. That was a comprehensive one. Tara, I'll come back to you with other questions shortly. But let me come to Joshua Mallet. Dr. Mallet, so from the SENDLOS perspective, what are your thoughts whether there is a national plan to promote remote learning to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on young learners? And if there is, how effective has this plan been so far? And if there's an opportunity to scale?
Thank you, Bernard. Once again, good morning. Let me speak in my capacity as a consulting member of SENDLOS. And as you know, SENDLOS is part of the Ministry of Education, a huge ministry, and SENDLOS is still evolving. And for now, it's being called ICT for Education Reform. That's what we're tackling. So an aspect of our work is focused on what we are discussing this morning, looking at what we have done. So I'm not speaking as an authority on national programs, but rather what is being done. Interestingly enough, when Tara referred to the iCampus, this concept actually came into effect before COVID, because COVID just took us unaware, and for some reason we were ready, quite ready, at least at the senior high school level, with both the iCampus, which is online, and iBox, which is offline version of the same iCampus. In fact, I love the iBox more because it seems to fit into the situation today than ever before. I'll speak more on it later. What the national plan has been so far is to look at the situation and solve it as it's coming. I don't personally believe that we could project the solution for education for tomorrow or for next year, or because we don't know what will happen. We thought when we started, a lot of people I interacted with thought that COVID was just going to be with us for 1 year and that it will start fading away slowly. But now it looks as if it's getting more scary and we don't know what will happen tomorrow. So it means we must be ready. We must plan towards that. What we did actually was to focus first of all at SENDLOS on senior high school. And we provided enough content for the core subjects and a little bit of some of the STEM-based electives. And what we did was to give videos of teachers teaching, give virtual laboratory experiments for people to be able to do their practical work on the computer, and then give quizzes that are self-assessed so that you can get the results as you do it yourself. We had in mind the fact that there are different levels of students. Mind you, for our side, we are dealing with the public sector. And if you take senior high school alone, we have 721 recognized senior high schools, public, not counting the over 300 private. So we're dealing with a huge number. And compared to maybe GIS, where my colleague is enjoying in a class of 20. We are talking about, you know what we're talking about. You know what she's talking about.
I see Dr. Ashun is smiling.
She is smiling. I can see her face. Every student has access already to computer. We are dealing with people who have not even seen the computer before, or a school that has only one computer. And I shudder to say that a school has a computer which actually is using should I tell you the truth? I saw it in the school. It actually has a computer with a floppy disk. So
Are you serious?
Yes,
floppy discussing that what we used to have in the 90s.
So you know it. So you see, we have a bigger challenge,
Wow.
and what we do is to find a solution and to give a bit of level ground. Thanks to the development partners, what we did on Ghana Learning was to provide just an aspect of what we have done for senior high school. That is just the video, which is a monologue. It's not interactive. But if they were to go to the iBox, they would have had all the access to it. So I would say that the plan I see or I envisage is that we're solving the problem with time. We're trying to make it work even better. What we're targeting now, what I personally am hoping for is students to have access to devices. Once they have access to devices, whether we're able to solve the full problem of internet or not, they have access to devices, they will start doing something. A greater proportion will have access to the content. Either they pay or it is paid for them. So that is my prayer, that we should now begin to empower learners, both teachers and students. And let me quickly add also that we have through the process been training the teachers, training them in online delivery. And these days it's difficult to give it one name. Somebody calls it online, somebody calls it blended, somebody calls it, in fact, it is a mixture of all things with ICT introduced into it. And it happens in different ways. We as a public sector are looking at a school in Hamley, which is close to a border, almost no electricity, and coming all the way down to cosmopolitan Accra, which has everything in glory, or going to the capital of education for SHS, which is Cape Coast. So we're looking at all that, but how do we do it for everybody to have the same balance of education?
Thank you. Let's come to another issue. And I need to just announce that we are live on City FM and also on social media, including YouTube and Facebook. We're talking education. It's the eDTech Monday brought to you by the MasterCard Foundation. My guests are Dr. Mary Ashun, Tara O'Connell, and Dr. Joshua Mallet. We now want to talk about the impact on the actors within the educational system. Now, Dr. Mary, you hinted to this in your first answer, but I just wanted to push you a bit more on this. So tell me a bit more about how the situation we've just discussed affected teachers and parents, and how can we better prepare teachers in particular for what has become the new normal of education in the world?
Thank you, Bernard. Before I answer your question,
Doc, we lost you momentarily there. If you can restate your opening.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. So start again.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. I said before I answer your question, I'd like to respond to Dr. Mallet's comment about the class of 20. Only my littlest kids are class of 20, I must admit. I've got larger classes. And then, of course, when we get up to the higher forms as well. So we don't have class of 20 all the way through, although I would love to have that kind of a class size. And you mentioned something as well to do with something that made me think about impact. And the fact that in our strategic plan, although we are a school that is very privileged, we recognize this privilege. And because of that, our goal, number 4 in our strategic plan, is to make impact in our community through service. And that service comes in the way of partnerships. So for me, one of those ways of scaling up, and Bernard, I forgot to mention this earlier, but Dr. Mallet, thank you for bringing it up for me, is public-private partnerships, how to get schools like ours to partner with schools that you have described who don't have the devices, but perhaps we could help train teachers. And this is something that I would be very willing to take up. And I'm sure a lot of the other schools that are privileged like ours would love to do that. So onto the question about how the situation affected teachers and parents. I want to start with parents, and then Bernard, if that's okay, I can move into teachers. For parents, I know it was a huge toll on family life, huge. Some parents lost their jobs and they still had to pay us fees. And they still had to be their kids' facilitator at home. Of course, a lot of parents said, I'm still teaching my child at home. You're facilitating because we're giving you the work and we're giving you instruction, and we are also working with your kid online. What we need you to do is facilitation, and that was hard. Many of us weren't spending enough time with our children to even know how our children learn. So it was difficult because all of a sudden, what we were seeing in school, parents were seeing it at home, and they did not have the skill set to deal with it. And we couldn't go to their homes to say, this is how little Johnny learns, you know. So that was difficult, and we felt their pain. We knew how difficult it was for them. One day, of course, the positives will be evident. I think the time that parents are spending with children now, fantastic. And we couldn't have done it any other way, you know. And so, you know, COVID in some way has got a few good points there. It has forced us to be at home with our children, get to know them better, play with them, talk with them, that sort of thing. Now, on to teachers. For teachers, it has been a lot of work. Contrary to what parents may be thinking, that, you know, you don't have the large class in front of you. You're not saying, sit down, Johnny, don't go to the washroom. Okay, you went to the washroom. Okay, then you can't go again, you know, in less than 10 minutes. That sort of classroom management has come down a whole lot, but it's still there. Because although kids are online, you know, you can see that they're online, but their cameras are off. And if you were to ask them, they'll say, you know, my bandwidth, you know.
Tell me about it.
But yeah, but they could be sleeping, you know. So you might have a very quiet class and you're like, wow, online learning is amazing for classroom management. But really, it's because most of them are asleep, you know. So for teachers, that extra effort to engage is difficult for them. How do you engage someone who doesn't want to talk and you can't see their face? You can't see what's going on, because we take a lot of cues from people's body language, and children especially haven't yet learned how to hide a lot of that, you know. So for teachers, the work of engaging so that you can go in and actually place some nuggets of wisdom, that was really, really difficult. I think that one of the best ways of training teachers, it continues to be the best way, and I'm sure Tara and Joshua will agree with me, the practicum training. You know, there's only so much books can tell you, but time and time again, surveys reveal that placing teachers in the actual space in which we expect them to work is still the best training for them. And at this time when we are online, what better time? Because let's say a teacher over in Cape Coast University doesn't have to come all the way to GIS to sit in my classroom. I can just give them a login and boom, they are in my classroom. They are watching a master teacher engage a room of 25 children, Dr. Mallet. I know that's not that much more, but it's more than 20. They are watching and they are learning how a master teacher strategizes and engages children. I don't think at this time, one of the things that we need to focus on is curriculum. I think we need to focus on well-being. You know, we need to ask ourselves, how are we teaching these children to adapt to situations like this? Because life is going to throw us more of it. This is not the last pandemic our children are going to see. One of the things that occupies my mind is, what kind of children am I going to get in September? If school opens fully, what kind of children am I going to get? What kind of adults am I going to place in front of them in the classroom to teach them? We have all changed throughout this process. Right? And we need to be planning to take care of that change, and that planning that Joshua mentioned, programs. We need programs and preparedness, programs envisioning what could be, as opposed to always curriculum. I think by the time someone gets to teacher training college, they know enough math to teach class 3. They may know enough science to teach Form 1. You know, so why are we teaching them more science? If anything, we're just brushing up and just ensuring that, as Tara said, they have the tools with which to constantly have formative assessments and then eventually summative assessments. What we need to teach is attitudes towards work, attitudes towards child development, attitudes towards coping and becoming adaptable and flexible. This is what we need to be teaching teachers. So I hope if anyone's listening, I want to see a course outline in our teacher education programs where we look at dispositions, attitudes, and approaches to adaptability and flexibility. That's what I want my teachers to have.
If you did a program on helping parents manage kids to learn at home, I would pay to take part. Trust me, I'll I'll pay you top dollar to take part.
Wonderful. It's coming your way. You've given me a business idea. You know,
telling-
typical educators, we don't think business. So thank you very much for that.
I'll come with my wife and we'll sit down humbly and just come and listen. Anyway, I'll come back. So let's come to Tara. So Tara, as you can clearly decipher from the conversation, there's a huge divide, right? So we are talking about access to devices, access to internet, people still using
Right.
computers with floppy disks and things. What role do you think governments and international partners like UNICEF can play in ensuring equitable access or fair access for all?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Bernard. Yeah, it's a great question, and it's really at the center of this discussion today, and I think more broadly in the sector. I think equity, when we look at digital and technology solutions in education, I think equity has to be a key factor in determining a way forward in a country. So whilst we develop strategies, and we certainly don't want to miss opportunities to use innovations and to really engage with the technologies that we now see are out there to support our education sector and learning, we also need to keep in mind that not everyone is yet connected. And Dr. Mallet has already pointed that out. And, you know, unfortunately, the reality is that there are a large number of children and youth that, one, don't have connectivity in the household, but even more than that, are engaged in income generation activities or are outside of the household during what we would normally call the school and the learning day, who have no space to engage and no opportunity to engage. And so I think any planning needs to ensure that we keep that at the heart of thinking and discussion. The Ministry of Education is currently developing an ICT policy, and that ICT policy will give us the overarching framework under which strategies and action plans will then be further developed. UNICEF at a global level is engaging in what we call the GIGA initiative. This initiative, it's a broad partnership globally, but it's looking at ensuring that all children globally, it's a target of 3.5 million, will be connected to internet by 2030. And what the GIGA initiative is looking to promote and to suggest is that we need a shift in our thinking in education to, and more broadly, in society, to look at as a digital public good, and therefore should be available to everyone in society by 2030. This is the overarching thinking. Within that, I think we need to recognize that, again, going back to the reality that Dr. Mallet has made clear, we cannot think that overnight we are going to be able because they don't have access very that children and youth and as well adults of all ages in Ghana eventually have connectivity. And connectivity does not necessarily mean we have to have fiber optic bands throughout the country, but we need to use those technologies that are available through satellites and other, and we need to tap into partnerships with private sector to create a expectation that we will be working towards internet connectivity for all children in Ghana. MasterCard Foundation has been one of the front runners in this, and some of you may have seen the announcement over the weekend that Elon Musk, the global entrepreneur from South Africa, he has announced that he will be supporting UNICEF globally with some significant financing to ensure that there is this movement towards connecting all children globally to the internet through schools. So I think this is something we can look more at. The GIGA initiative includes a mapping, and I think we need to start there with evidence and mapping of all schools and their connectivity. Once we have that in place, we can then understand where our gaps are and plan strategies from there, keeping in mind that equity angle and ensuring that radio programming and other programming reaches children who don't have the connectivity in the interim. So I think those are the key points that I would highlight.
Brilliant. Let's come back to Dr. Mallet. So we know that there's a lot of talk about technology-enabled learning, but the question to you is, to what extent has COVID-19 led to an upsurge in the adoption of these tools? And how do we scale up the adoption? And what role does government and possibly eDTech organizations, what roles do they have to play in this regard?
Sorry. Well, Bernard, you remember the famous quote from Dr. Agri. He said, train a woman and or educate a woman and you educate a whole nation. Listening to my two colleagues speak, you could see that they have got the solution already, the two women. So I'm only just going to add to it. They've talked about everything. What I think the Ministry of Education has been doing is to make more people get access. And learning from COVID-19, we installed iBoxes. And I'm referring to it again. Let me explain it better now. Knowing surely, just like Tara said, we don't have connectivity everywhere. The iBox is like a mini server in your school with a radius of 100 meters. You could actually connect to the internet free of charge. Just use the Wi-Fi with any device. And the content is such that it is even good for the slow learner. It is able to assess what you are doing as a teacher or a student, and you take your time to learn it. Government is trying actually to upscale that, and I think very soon a few other schools will be added to it. So far, we have about 150 SHS using the iBox, and I guess there are about 83 or so coming again. So that is where I bring in what Tara said, partnership, and Mary also mentioned the same thing, partnership. MasterCard is blessing us with this kind of awareness. Get these iBoxes into schools. Once it is there, what happens? If a student has a smartphone or a tablet or a laptop, you just go and sit anywhere in the school within range. If we have a little money, we extend it using access points. Now, you go to anywhere and sit. If you don't have any gadget, then you now go into the school computer room, which may have 10, 20, 30, or 40 computer rooms. And who knows? We now come to the typical Ghanaian system of queuing. You come in, you wait for the next 1 hour, you go out. You sanitize the place, somebody else must come in. If you are sitting with your own device under a tree somewhere, free, sit there. If Mary is not there to bring you water and food, buy the food and the water, keep it by your side. And so I think looking at what is happening now and the lessons learned, to me, this will be a sure way to go. Government is surely working at a process of getting the devices available, but it's not yet come. Getting more iBoxes available is not yet come. But we can do these, in my opinion. And again, let me say that when Tara touched on ICT in education policy, it's true. Government is working on that. But the good news is that government is not waiting for the policy to be ready, which to me has always been the right thing to do. We are implementing things, trying things, innovating things, experimenting things. And that is even helping us maybe upgrade the policy. And if you ask me, with my many years of experience in these things, a policy will never be perfect if you wait for it. You just get a policy passed, we'll be working on it, and then as and when necessary, we'll review it. So right now, government has learned a lot of lessons, and we have tried to catch up. And more schools are catching up. And I'm thinking that very soon, I'm not a government spokesman, but I'm thinking that very soon the GES might come out with something to say about the use of devices, that is, bring your own devices in schools. And then, in my opinion, that will also help. So finally, let me just say that the partnership, as Mary mentioned and Tara also touched on, will be the most important thing to do. Partnership. There is so much in the system already. We don't need to reinvent, but how to partner, how to use it, how to deploy and make students and teachers get access to content in this era will be very important. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. We have like 5 minutes to wrap up. So I'm going to take closing comments in forms of a question and then closing comments from each person. So Dr. Ashun, lots of things keep coming back to you, but I want you to give me one or two big changes we need in the general educational sector, and who should lead these changes in view of the new reality. One or two big changes we need to see in the educational sector in view of the new reality.
Yeah. My first one, Bernard, would be our attitude towards preparedness, to tackle delivery of all kinds. Learning delivery has come a long way, but for a long time, we were just focused on campus, that we went to school and we studied in school. And now COVID has shoved us into realizing that delivery can come in all shapes and sizes. For schools that have also done some research on what they are doing, what we have found out is that children learn differently. We always knew this, but I don't think that we had put it down in that kind of way. And so because children learn differently, the modes of delivery will be effective for some and not for others. We're seeing children who are doing very well online. All right. Maybe they just love that quiet space. Maybe there's a bullying issue. Maybe. There are all sorts of reasons. But at least it's forcing us to ask the questions: how do children learn, and how can we support them so that we can get them to learn well? How do we monitor these kinds of learning? And then how do we supervise, and how do we measure how well they have done? So this would be one of the things that I think we need to change, that attitude towards first preparedness and then looking at how we deliver. In terms of leading, we've heard from Dr. Mallet, we've heard from Dr. O'Connell, and it's the partnership that Joshua just mentioned as well. There's so many people who are leading from the very top, and it is comforting when I hear somebody working in government who has such vision and who knows what needs to be done. For those of us that are on the ground implementing, I think it's exciting. We need to get to the point where school leaders are able to implement the changes that they would like to see without going through mounds and mounds of bureaucracy, because school leaders should be tasked with that visioning and that implementation as well. For independent schools, we have no excuse whatsoever. We don't have that many layers, and probably this is the reason why we're able to jump headlong into things. For teachers need to be ready to be open to new strategies. They shouldn't stop learning. They should see each child as a possibility. For parents, the attitude is so important. What you display to your children at home is what they will pick up. If you disrespect teachers, they will disrespect teachers. And however meager your circumstance, I truly believe, like Tara was saying, that there's something that can be done at every level. So wrapping up, I would like to see some change in that preparedness mindset, which is difficult for us as Ghanaians. We don't always hear really great stories about being prepared. And so when we see these models of preparedness, we should look at them and we should learn from them. And then just equipping everybody with that attitude of trying to see the possibility in what we have been handed down.
Just a quick one, Doc. Somebody who presumably is a parent sent a question that why is your school still not open? I think there's a parent who's really wondering why.
Oh dear.
He's having to deal with kids at home still. Just a minute to answer that quickly.
All right. We're not fully open. We have our examination students in class from 5 and upper 6. We are not fully open because our community has been hard hit. Maybe nationwide, we are ready to open, but as a GIS community, we have been really hard hit. You may have heard that one of our teachers passed away, a stalwart member of the GIS community. We have a couple of staff members too who are ill. So it's really our context. Also, we have a marvelous virtual learning environment. So it's not that if children don't come to school, I have nothing for them. I have plenty for them, and it's working well. So it's a much safer option for me right now.
Thank you. Tara, your final thoughts, looking at what we've discussed and the interventions we've proposed. What are your final quick thoughts going forward?
Final quick thoughts going forward. I think a lot of good work has been done. I think we need to continue to look at innovations, but keeping an eye on what we already have in place that can be built on. The targeted instruction that's being rolled out, it's being rolled out in 10,000 schools through what we call the Gallup project. The targeted instruction now is looking at how it can help children who have suffered from this school closure to catch up. And that's an important thing, that remedial type of teaching and learning as schools reopen, trying to understand where the children are lagging through assessments and helping them with additional support. Also looking at areas where we have things like the mobile school report card that's already rolled out in schools across the country. Not all schools, but many. Looking at how we can get data from that mobile school report card to understand this situation better. We still don't know all of the children that are not coming back to school, and that's critical. So while we do see that children coming back have some clear learning gaps, we have no idea yet on those populations of students that are not coming back, where they are and why. We have some ideas, but we don't have the data. So we need to possibly strengthen that as well. And I go back to just partnerships. The opportunities that COVID has created are clear. There's a lot of momentum globally to look at new learning opportunities through remote, through continuous learning, through online and other forms. And the ability of Ghana Education Service to take on board lessons learned in real time from other countries also struggling with this same challenge right now across the world. It's an important opportunity for us. I think those would be the key things to work towards.
Thank you so much. Let me give Dr. Mallet the last 30 seconds. You are the Sendlos guy, one of the people who are part of the solution. So what are your quick thoughts as we close?
Thank you. 30 seconds. I'll say two key things. Let us, with all the privileges we have with development partners and then the private institutions in the country and the Ministry of Finance, that's government, let us bring in more technology. Let us bring in more technology. Let us release opportunities for people to have devices. Then number two, let us encourage individualized learning. What is happening now, just like Mary said, we might not be able to sit in the classroom and follow the entire syllabus. Individualized learning. Somebody needs to take his time or her time to go through something again and understand it. Better to understand a little chunk well than to rush through everything and not understand anything at all. So more technology into the system and individualized learning. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Dr. Joshua Mallet from Sendlos. We also have Tara O'Connell, UNICEF's Chief of Education in Ghana, and Dr. Mary Shen, an educationist and a parent. Great talking to you. This has been the eDTech Monday on Technology-Enabled Education Lessons from 2020, brought to you by the MasterCard Foundation, which is working in multiple countries, and particularly these days in Africa, to bring equity and fairness, inclusion, and other things. Now, in Africa, they have the Young Africa Works program in Ghana, which will enable the growth of women-owned enterprises through business development services, enable young people to acquire skills that are needed, and scale digital training. This has been the City Breakfast Show. Thank you for listening. We just let you know quickly what's happening, Kokwi. So, whilst we're on education, digital, and all of that, don't forget